and Aboriginal elders of other communities who may be here today. The theme of the International Women's Day this year is Break the Bias, and so it is fitting that we are attempting today to break the silence on a very common condition that is not spoken enough about. Early menopause and premature ovarian insufficiency, or POI, affect up to 1 in 10 women and have profound impacts on the lives of those women who are impacted. So today we will hear from a range of internationally leading experts in the field. We will showcase a groundbreaking new early menopause app that will change women's lives. And then we will jump into the panel with the experts and do a Q&A. So let's get started. I will introduce to you Professor Helena Teede. So Professor Helena Teede is the Director of the Monash Centre for Health Research and Implementation, MCHRI, and Monash University, Monash Partners Academic Health Service Centre. Helena is an endocrinologist at Monash Health and is an internationally recognised women's health researcher, including as lead of the CRE-WhiRL. Thanks, Helena.
Thanks very much, Rhonda. So it's a good place to start on what the CRE-WhiRL is. So around the Centre for Research Excellence in Women's Health and Reproductive Life. And the key areas that we focus in there in our collaboration and partnership across Monash Health and Monash University, and also nationally and internationally, is areas of women's reproductive health that are often neglected or not well understood, but highly prevalent. And so that includes polycystic ovary syndrome, infertility, but also early menopause or premature ovarian insufficiency, as we've heard from Dr. Garrard. This is a particularly common condition which can be very distressing for women, and in the theme of the International Women's Day and of breaking the bias, this session is about breaking the silence, because it's something that is really not well discussed. Myself, Amanda, Professor Vollenhoven, who's online here as well, and Associate Professor Amanda Vincent, have worked in the services at Monash Health that provide care for and with women affected by this condition. And indeed, it can be very challenging for them to go on this journey through their lives and not necessarily have access to evidence-based information that meets their needs. Often it's more tailored to the standard time in life that we go through through menopause, rather than to the earlier life stages where there can be real challenges. So the Centre for Research Excellence in Women's Health and Reproductive Life in the area of early menopause and premature ovarian insufficiency, Associate Professor Amanda Vincent actually leads this stream of work, but the research there is around finding answers for some of the most highly prioritised questions for women and the health professionals who partner with them in their care. That includes what are some of the long-term health implications of this condition, including higher rates of osteoporosis, which can give you higher risks of breaking your bones as you get older, and how we can prevent that complication. Some of the risks around cardiovascular disease or heart disease, and again, how we can prevent that longer term. But also a large body of research, which we'll hear a little bit about today, which had a lot to do with this app development, which is the experiences and the lived experiences that women who go through this life stage have, and how we can support and enable them to have a smoother, more informed transition through this life stage and to work through some of the challenges it presents to them. And that's a really important research endeavour, and this is a really important translation outcome from this. I'll also mention that the Centre for Research Excellence covers a number of large-scale international guidelines. And the reason we do that, and again, Associate Professor Amanda Vincent has a lead role in that international guideline with societies from all around the world. And the intention of that is to bring the best evidence-based information to practice, but also to women. And so the body of work from previous guidelines and updated through this process that's underway at the moment will feed into the app, but in a way providing a vehicle that is designed with women for women to make sure that that evidence-based but supportive information is readily available, freely available at their fingertips in a way that it is actually useful for them to go on their own journey, but also to partner with their health professionals in that journey. So I'm going to hand over now back to Dr. Garrard to take us to the next step. But I think there's a lot of exciting information and research and translation to come out of this, and really fantastic to have Professor Vollenhoven launch this for us. And just once again, really wanting to acknowledge the fantastic leadership and work of Associate Professor Amanda Vincent, and to thank Kirsty for also sharing her personal journey with us as well today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Helena. I'd just also say we are recording this session, and we will upload this session on YouTube on the completion of today's event. Also to say, if you do have questions, please do pop them in the chat. If we get a chance, we will read them, but if we don't, feel free to sign up to the app and pop your questions in the discussion forum, and we will get a response to you. So it is my great pleasure now, and as Helena said, we are thrilled that Professor Beverley Vollenhoven could join us today. So Beverley, a gynaecologist and reproductive endocrinologist, is the Carl Ward Chair, Obstetrics and Gynaecology at Monash Health, Head of Gynaecology at Monash Health, and is an infertility specialist at Monash IVF. Beverley received the Member of the Order of Australia Award in 2020 for significant service to medical education and research, to endocrinology and to women's health. So I'll hand over to Beverley.
Thank you. Thanks so much. And thanks for asking me to launch this early menopause app as part of International Women's Day. As you can see from my background, I may be good at IVF, but I'm not so great on the technological side of things, despite 2 years of online meetings. So these are all babies who have been born as a result of IVF. So talking about early menopause, as you can imagine, it's a devastating diagnosis, especially in an adolescent or in a young woman where their families have not been completed. I mean, it's a devastating diagnosis to anyone, but especially in that group of people. And early menopause occurs in about 1% of women under the age of 40, but has a lower incidence under the women, in women under the age of 30. So it may be 0.1%. There's often a delay in the diagnosis because when women present to GPs and they're in the adolescent years or their early, their early 20s, for example, and they may present either with irregular periods or not having a period, early menopause is not front of center in someone's mind. And so often it may be some time before they actually get this, this diagnosis. And I think giving someone a diagnosis of early menopause is probably one of the most difficult consultations that anyone can do. Either a GP giving them their initial diagnosis or someone like me talking about what the future may hold. So I think it's a very difficult diagnosis to impart upon someone, and obviously you have to do it with kindness because it is devastating to a lot of women. I think one of the other issues in giving someone a diagnosis is that, the first question they'll ask is why? Why has this happened to me? And a lot of the time, we don't actually have the answer to that question. We don't know why it occurs. Sometimes in about half of the women who are diagnosed with this condition. Now, there may be obvious reasons. So one of the commoner reasons is that there may be a chromosomal disorder, and something called Turner syndrome comes to mind, and that's when someone is born with one X chromosome rather than two X chromosomes. And there can also be a variety of Turner syndrome. It's called Turner syndrome mosaic, where there are different permutations and combinations of that X chromosome. So that's one chromosomal problem. And then there is another issue, which may be the person may be a carrier of Fragile X. Fragile X is a genetic condition that affects males where they may have an intellectual disability, but women who have the condition go through menopause early. So Fragile X is another genetic diagnosis. And again, if those two are not the diagnosis, it may take some years for a diagnosis to become apparent, if it ever does. So there are some women who have antibodies against their ovaries and develop antibodies against their thyroid and their adrenal as well. And these may not be apparent initially, but may become apparent later. So in my job, I see women initially to make a diagnosis. So if someone comes to me not having had any or many tests done, and their periods are irregular, or they haven't had a period at all, then there'll be the discussion about what the initial diagnosis is. Or I might see women who've had the diagnosis made by their GPs or another specialist, and I'm seeing them to talk about their, I guess the future in terms of hormone therapy, but also to talk to them about, childbearing in the future, if that's what they would like to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to present 4 cases of which I hope will sort of explain the different scenarios. These are real people. I haven't made anything up. Obviously, I haven't said any names, but these are women who I've seen in my practice over a number of years. And a lot of the patients actually, I think 3 of the cases I'm going to present are women who I've seen since they've been very young, in their teenage years, and now I'm seeing them in their 30s. So as you can see, I'm not young, and I've been in practice for a while. So one of the first patients I'd like to talk about is someone who I saw again in the early years of my clinical practice, and she was 16 and she presented with primary amenorrhea. So she'd never had a period. And so she's now in her 30s. So she had normal breast development at the time, and she had normal growth. So she was as tall, or if not taller, than her mother. And multiple hormonal results that were initially done by her GP and then confirmed by me showed that she'd gone through menopause early. She came in with her mother, and I've never found a reason as to why she's gone through menopause early. She's had Fragile X testing, chromosomal testing was done, and she's never developed any antibodies against her thyroid or her adrenals. So we've never found a cause. Obviously, the 3 of us were devastated by the news I imparted. And like many young women, she really didn't have any menopausal symptoms at all. A lot of young women don't. But obviously, we still need to treat them hormonally because of the risks they face in terms of bone risks and heart health. So she was actually first started on the oral contraceptive pill because it was easy. She's now on menopausal hormone therapy. And we've had I usually talk about donor eggs right at the start of the diagnosis, when I make the diagnosis, even though at 16, that's not what they're thinking. But I think it's important for these patients to know that having a diagnosis of early menopause does not mean that they can never get pregnant. They may not be able to get pregnant with their own eggs, but they can still have a pregnancy, they can deliver, and they can have a child. So I usually talk about the fact that donor eggs is available later on when they want to become pregnant. She has had no interest in getting pregnant at all. The other thing I do is obviously the app is only new, and now I can refer people to look at the app. But I also referred her to a psychologist, which she has found useful over the years. And the next patient I'm also going to talk about is similarly a young woman who was diagnosed in the same way, but also has some very serious unrelated health issues. She's got a congenital heart, she's got congenital heart disease and has had multiple heart operations. Again, I have found no cause as to why she's gone through menopause early, but she's currently having donor eggs. Her cousin has donated eggs to her, and she's about to have a transfer. So fingers crossed that she does well and becomes pregnant. This is one patient who I have really admired over the years. Despite all of the health knocks she's had, and she's had many, she's recently had, at the end of last year, she had bacterial endocarditis. She really has remained so positive. She's just an example to all of us, really. And hopefully now she'll have the joy of becoming pregnant. The next patient I want to talk about is actually the daughter of a family of 4 sisters. She's one of the sisters' daughters, who I looked after again quite early on. And all 4 sisters either were postmenopausal or perimenopausal when I saw them. And 3 of the sisters had pregnancy using donor eggs under my care. And 1 sister had a child using her own eggs. So when they first presented, we weren't actually doing Fragile X screening because it wasn't a thing at that time. I've probably given away the diagnosis now, but anyway, it certainly wasn't a thing at that time. And after they had their children or became pregnant, I lost contact with all of them until the mother of the child who was conceived naturally came to see me last year to find out if her daughter may have the same issues. Her daughter is 19, well now 20, and has completely normal periods, completely regular periods. So she had an AMH of 9, and I think we might talk about AMH in a little bit more detail later. And she was diagnosed with Fragile X as a carrier of Fragile X. And she has had egg freezing. And after 2 cycles of egg freezing, she has almost, I think she has 29 eggs in storage. So that's an interesting concept for someone who has a low AMH. One of her aunts who got pregnant with me with donor eggs, who now lives in Singapore, has recently made contact, wondering about her Fragile X status just for interest and to discuss her hormonal treatment. And she's also been found to be a carrier of Fragile X. So it's quite interesting how, I guess, medicine has changed over a number of years. And my last patient is a woman in her 30s who saw me now probably about 4 years ago. And she came in with the diagnosis of early menopause and was wanting to really have more children. She has 2. She has 2. So we had a discussion at that time about donor eggs, as well as the treatment of her debilitating symptoms, because she has had terrible hot flushes and night sweats and has been unable to sleep. So all of these symptoms have been resolved using hormonal therapy, and she's now resigned herself that she doesn't want any more children. She has positive thyroid antibodies, but her thyroid function is normal. So I'm hoping that these 4 cases display some of the patients I've seen and continue to look after in the various forms, either their ongoing management in terms of their hormonal treatment, but also as a break in between with getting pregnant. And
Beverley, thank you so much. That's fabulous. We certainly get, we certainly understand the complexity and the diversity in the presentations, and really appreciate that. And we will get you to speak more about in the Q&A. So thank you very much for that. I just want to let people know that we are live tweeting. So if you are a Twitterer, we are using the hashtag Break the Bias and also Early Menopause App. So please feel free to tweet to your heart's content. Now, our next speaker, one of my favourite things I get to do in my job is to work with this person. So Associate Professor Amanda Vincent is not only an expert in the field, but she's a person I know that is more committed than anyone else I know to making sure that women get access to high quality information. She's incredibly dedicated to this, hence she will talk about the app. So Professor Vincent is, Associate Professor, is head of the early menopause research at MCHRI and Monash University, and the early menopause research stream lead. Amanda is a clinician researcher combining clinical practice in menopause with menopause-related research, translation and education. She's a lead endocrinologist in the menopause and menopause oncology clinics at Monash Health. She's also the co-lead of the early menopause stream, as I said, in the WHiRL, and a lead researcher on the app. Amanda, go ahead.
Thank you, Rhonda. And what I'm going to do is I would like to provide you with an outline of how we got here today, launching this app at International Women's Day. So I've been working as a doctor in the menopause clinic for over 20 years, many of those years with Beverley, I'm delighted to say, but also from our research surveying over 200 women with early menopause and over 800 Australian doctors. We know that women are confused or unaware about early menopause and what it might mean for them. They often have difficulties communicating with their health professionals about early menopause, especially about vaginal symptoms and sexual or mental health issues. They're unsure about treatment options and are often frustrated or dissatisfied with much of the information available. And they've found in the past little support for the self-management of early menopause. From our surveys of doctors, we know that they have knowledge gaps and show variation in the care of early menopause. And we also assess the quality of websites for women and the guidelines for doctors about early menopause and found deficiencies in relation to these. So from all of this work in our clinical practice, we concluded that there was both a significant need for doctors and also women with early menopause for quality information to inform and support women and also their health professionals about early menopause. So together with women with early menopause and our research partners, including RMIT University, the National Breast Cancer Foundation, Women's Health Victoria, Monash Health, the Australasian Menopause Society, and Health Talk Australia, we co-designed the Health Talk Australia Early Menopause Digital Resource, which was launched in November 2019 by the Honourable Gabrielle Williams, the Victorian Minister for Women at Women's Health Victoria. So this digital resource combines women's stories of their experiences, a question prompt list, evidence-based information, algorithms for doctors to help diagnose and manage early menopause, and links to other resources. But that was not quite enough. The Ask Early Menopause app for women with early menopause builds on this earlier work, and it's been sort of designed with further feedback from women with early menopause and also incorporates the addition of new tools to support women to manage their early menopause. We aim to develop a personal guide for women with early menopause with this app. The app provides women's stories of their experiences again, and also provides evidence-based information about different topics related to early menopause that's relevant to women. The information pages have been designed to provide key points about what women need to know and then what they can do about it. In addition, and what's really exciting about the app, as opposed to what we also had, which is really useful with our Health Talk Australia digital resource, is that we've developed a personalised dashboard for women so that they can set their own individual goals, as well again using the question prompt list to select individual questions that are important for them to ask their health professional. We've also now incorporated a discussion forum for question and answers for women. Getting from this is a great idea stage to the reality depends on and involves a lot of talented people and a lot of hard work. And so I'd particularly like to acknowledge the women with early menopause, including Kirsty, who provided their ideas and feedback, Rhonda Garrett with her education expertise, and Suzanne Baker and the digital health team for their expertise in digital application development, and also the WHiRL for funding support. I'm really proud of what we've achieved, and I would now like to Suzanne to show you a video about the app. Thank you very much.
Okay, so that's a little taster, and thank you, Amanda. And I actually never tire of watching that little overview of the app. We're very, very excited about this app, and I know that you know, women will benefit greatly from signing up and using the app. So without further ado, we are incredibly grateful to have the next person with us today. Kirsty Costa wears many hats, some of which are as an educator and public speaker, but she's here with us today to generously share her lived experience, but also as an advocate for women who are or have experienced early menopause. Thank you, Kirsty.
Thank you, Rhonda, and hello everyone who's tuning in. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from the land of the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. And in the lead up to International Women's Day, I'd also like to acknowledge the incredible Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women who do an incredible contribution to community, to Australia, to the world. So many thanks to them. So every woman is different and every story is different. So I'm going to share with my story with you today, but I want to acknowledge and thank the people who created this incredible resource, because every woman is different and every story is different. It's been a privilege and an honour to work on this project to support women with all of their stories and all of their different adventures that we have with our health diagnosis. So I also want to do a shout out to anyone who's watching who has premature menopause like me. Listening to Beverley and Amanda speak is so amazing and can be really empowering, and it can also be really triggering because, you know, getting an early menopause diagnosis can be quite overwhelming, but I'm here today to tell you that you're not alone and that your experience is normal, and I want to share a little bit more about mine, but I also want to acknowledge that maybe my story, you might find something common with it, and it might be a little bit triggering for you as well. So please take care of yourself as you listen to my story. I also want to acknowledge that I'm giving my story 10 years later after my diagnosis. So you'll see in this app, there are some videos of me, and I was really in the thick of it when I was being interviewed as part of this resource. And 10 years later, my story is very different, and it's amazing how time can be very useful in your menopause journey. So I was diagnosed with natural and early onset premature menopause at 31. And this happened after my husband and I were trying to start our new family and start trying to have children. We lost a pregnancy early on, and it wasn't related to my menopause diagnosis in the end. And when we, and it was very sad, and big shout out to any woman who has, and man who has been through that experience. And as part of that, there was a lot of grief and a lot of loss. And my periods didn't return after that. I started to hot flush. There was a really long diagnosis period, which both Amanda and Beverley have alluded to, including, mine was 6 months actually, of trying to figure out. So first of all, my GP thought that maybe I was just experiencing some deep grief about losing a pregnancy. I also have some anxiety, so they thought maybe it was just anxiety in full flight. So we wondered if it was that. And then the blood test started about 3 months into that experience. And it was a long, drawn-out process as everyone tried to figure it out. My diagnosis, as I said, was given 6 months later, and it was a shock. Even though I knew that they were testing for different things like my follicle-stimulating hormone and all the different estrogen, it really came as a shock to me. And I must confess that I also did not receive it maybe in the most gentlest of ways. So I really appreciate Beverley talking about how hard it must be as a medical practitioner to give that diagnosis. And I'm sure there's no way to cushion the blow, but I really appreciate what you said, Beverley, around trying to cushion it a little bit if you can. So for me, I had no chromosomal disorder. I've got no Fragile X gene. I've got no family history of premature menopause. And I've had no answers about why I have premature menopause. And that is actually something that I've had to have made peace with over the last 10 years. Nothing more frustrating than when medicine doesn't give you the answers that you need, right? There's so many different parts of medicine that don't give us the answers that we need. And this was one of them for me. So again, I just want to do a shout out to any woman like me who also doesn't know why they have premature menopause. That can be really tricky as well. When I got my diagnosis, I felt like I'd been bombarded with bad news. It was like, Right, heart disease, osteoporosis, issues with potentially Alzheimer's dementia. And it was like coming at me. I felt like it was just, you know, all of this bad news was coming at me. And then on top of that, for me, it was a loss of fertility as well. And so I had trouble finding personal empowerment in that moment, like I had in the past with other health issues that I'd experienced. And part of that was because there was a lack of information. There was nowhere out there where I could actually go and empower myself and hear the stories of other people, and also get to really get across the medicine and the diagnosis and my options. I had to rely very heavily on health providers for that. And 10 years ago, actually, there was a little bit of conflict in terms of what people thought should be the right way to go with premature menopause. There was a lack of support. There was a lack of community of other women. And there was a lack of feeling normal. I felt like I was an absolute freak for having this diagnosis. One thing that I really struggled with was loneliness. So at 31, all my friends were having babies and I wasn't. And the people that I could relate to were my mum and her friends. So I felt very lonely in my experience. And at the same year, I actually got diagnosed with the BRCA2, breast cancer, ovarian cancer gene. And so that added a level of complication, which meant that I couldn't have IVF. And also I had very low AMH. So there wasn't much of an egg reserve there anyway. And so what is interesting is a bit of new research that's being proposed about whether there might be a link between the BRCA gene and premature menopause. Maybe one day I might find an answer to why I have premature menopause. So this whole experience, losing a pregnancy, finding out that I have the BRCA2 gene, and then finding out that I've got this premature menopause diagnosis, the early menopause diagnosis, led to some pretty significant depression, as you can imagine, pretty full-on news to experience. And also lots of anxiety as well. So the help of a great psychologist really helped me get through that. That wasn't actually, interestingly, something that any of my medical providers at the time suggested. I had to go out and find it myself. So if you are a doctor listening in, I think that would be something that could be really recommended if it's in someone's comfort zone to get the proper psychology support that they need with this diagnosis. And I guess the anxiety and depression exacerbated themselves because I didn't sleep for what felt like 5 years. I had really bad hot flushes. On average, I was sleeping 4 to 5 hours a night. I tried everything, all the different types of sheets, all the different types of clothing, putting ice packs on all the different things, cooling down with a shower. Nothing really worked for me. And I kind of had to soldier on a bit with it. And so that 5 years without sleep was also led to body changes. It led to weight gain and emotional eating, the feeling like I didn't have enough reserves, and also led to some really socially awkward things that I had to navigate as well. For example, I couldn't go out for dinner where it was too far away because I was just so tired. It was actually dangerous for me to drive home at night. My memory was really affected by the lack of sleep. I had a no baby showers policy because I found that really triggering. I found my other way to be part of the community in the village of people looking after babies, but I had to explain to all the people that I really loved, I can't be there for that celebration. And also when summer came, it filled me with dread because, you know, I mean, women joke about menopause and living in their own tropical paradise. There's nothing worse when your tropical paradise then goes into tropical weather. That was a real challenge as well. I used to dread summer. I also decided that it was time to tell a couple of people in my professional life. Everyone's different. I'm pretty open when it comes to sharing my story. And I know this is not the answer for everyone, but it was for me because I'd hot flush in the middle of a meeting. Sometimes I'd sit in a meeting and I feel like I experienced the full emotional wheel in one meeting and there was nothing that anyone said that triggered it. So at first I felt like I was going to cry, then I was going to laugh out loud, then I felt really sad, then I felt really happy. I just ran this weird gauntlet of emotions. Also, I needed a cool space. So I'm a professional public speaker. I'm a teacher and educator and facilitator. And I had to start saying no to venues that didn't have air conditioning. Because if not, I'd have that awkward moment where I'd sweat all over the people that I was facilitating a workshop for, and no one needs that. I also had to come up with an answer about when people ask me why I didn't have children. Now, that's an interesting one in itself. So I actually ended up deciding that I was going to tell people. And the reason why is pretty much the whole theme of this, which is about making menopause visible to other people and getting rid of some of the embarrassment or not feeling normal that sits around it. So it was a really hard time. It's been a really hard time for 10 years. The first 5 years in particular were really challenging. What changed the game for me was HRT. And I just want to acknowledge that that is actually not an option for all women. And I'm very lucky that it has been an option for me. But the reason that I waited 5 years is it's taken a while for us to work out whether or not you can give HRT to a BRCA2 patient. So HRT has given me my quality of life back. It's enabled me to sleep. It's enabled the hot flushes to settle down. But it is currently under review as I head into my mid-40s. It's under review about whether I should still be taking it as I age. So, you know, the next chapter's to come. So in terms of what I've learned that mental health is as important as physical health when it comes to this diagnosis. And if the person is not got their mental health on track and isn't getting the support that they need, however they need it, then all the other risk factors that we're talking about are actually going to come into play because they're not looking after themselves properly, or, you know, they're under significant stress. People are really understanding if you tell them what's going on, and it's important that you set boundaries for yourself if you are someone who's got early menopause. I've also learned that I can't live my diagnosis as my only identity. So while I have been absolutely privileged to work on projects like this, and you might have heard me on recently a couple of different podcasts, I try not to actually speak all the time about my diagnosis because I don't want to live it all the time. We are more than our diagnosis. And so I'm really careful about how often I speak about it and how much I want to recount what has been a really challenging time. But it's been a real honour to be part of this team, as I said, because breaking the silence has become a really important part actually of turning my pain into purpose and being able to actually share my story. So hopefully if you are currently a medical provider, you've got some great tips now on how you can help the Kirstys of the world. And if you're an early menopause patient like me and you've got that diagnosis, I just want to let you know you're not alone and you have a unique story, and I just want to acknowledge that, and that everyone has a story that's important, and you're okay, and we've got your back with this incredible app with all the information that you can access, and the stories you can access, and all the amazing features that have been designed just for you. So I am really grateful that this app has launched. I'm really grateful it now exists in the world, and I'm really grateful to all the medical providers who are working hard to support their patients with their diagnosis. Thanks, Rhonda.
Thank you, Kirsty. Thank you so much. You're just a fantastic speaker. It's so great to listen to you. So we might kick off the Q&A with you, Kirsty, while we're with you. Just reflecting back on your time, and it's now 10 years, as you say, when you were diagnosed, if you had a magic wand, what would you have liked to have been able to access at that time?
Thank you for asking that question. Well, obviously, I wish I could access information like this, and this is why I put my hand up to be part of this team in helping amazing resources like this happen. The information that I was able to provide was really useful, but didn't fully tailor itself to my unique situation. It was a little bit more general information, and as we know, every woman's story and every woman's diagnosis is slightly different in that way. So I'm really grateful for that information. I wish that I'd had people to talk to. You know, it even makes me teary thinking about it because it was so lonely and I felt like no one understood. And for example, I experienced childhood asthma, and I remember when my mum took me to a group of kids who also had asthma and what a difference that made to me. I didn't have that support group for for early menopause, and I would have really loved that. So I'm really grateful that this new resource provides a space for people to talk and connect. There is no space at the moment unless you want to go to an IVF support group, and that wasn't going to be the right support group for me. I also would love to talk for us, and in the lead up to International Women's Day, never has this been more pronounced for me. Menopause is still such a hidden thing in our society, which surprises me because we are such a large amount of the population as women. So I think something that I wish that if I'd waved my magic wand, I wish it could exist now, is more visibility about menopause, a stronger, louder conversation about menopause that also talks about what women need. And then I'd love to see early menopause become more visible as part of that conversation. I'm really grateful that over the last 10 years, 2 characters in popular TV shows have actually had early menopause, and that's fantastic to see those stories being told. I have a couple of filmmaker friends and I'm constantly telling them it's time to make a movie about this. But yeah, I'd like to see that visibility. And also the other thing, if I wave my magic wand, is a way for us as a society to have a important conversation about asking people about their fertility. There was nothing more. I felt like I constantly had pins stuck in me every single time people asked me about whether I had kids. And I know that we ask each other that as a very gentle question, particularly when we're trying to find common ground in our shared experience. But there was nothing worse than when people asked me that question, I told them about premature menopause and they asked me, have you thought about adoption? I felt like saying, oh, well, no, what a surprise. Thanks for the suggestion. So I think there's a way that we need to manage these conversations about infertility, knowing that for some women who experience early menopause, this is not a conversation they need to worry about. It wasn't a plan that they had. It's not a desire they have. For the women like me, a conversation that doesn't lead to IVF and adoption, but more of an acceptance that every woman's different. And some women like me have chosen not to have children. There's some work we need to do around that as well. But I think some of those are big, big wish list. I think that this app is an incredible start and is providing a significant gap that I felt was missing for me 10 years ago.
Fantastic, thank you. That's fine. I didn't put limits on your magic wand, so that's fine. Listen, Natalie, you might want to look at Q&A because Natalie has given you a big thank you. She's also asked a question. I'm going to throw it to the experts now, and it's a bit random, so they have no preparation. But Natalie asks about using natural or complementary therapies, and I know this is a big issue for a lot of women who experience early menopause. So I just would like three experts just to give their thoughts around whether any complementary therapies are worthwhile or just their perspectives. So Amanda, maybe I'll start with you.
Sure. So as far as complementary medicines are concerned, there's the sort of mind-body therapies. First of all, to say that there's really been, most of the research has been done in women with menopause at the usual age around about 50 years. So there's really not very, if any, sort of specific to women with early or premature menopause. In those older women, what is evident is that cognitive behavioural therapy and also hypnosis can be helpful for hot flushes, can be helpful for sleep, and can be helpful for mood. That's particularly the cognitive behavioural therapy. As far as a lot of the other herbal preparations, there's some evidence about soy isoflavones can be helpful, but the concern about is in those women with breast cancer, and they're the women who usually cannot take hormone replacement therapy. We don't know whether they're safe for women with breast cancer as well as, which is the problem with hormone replacement therapy. For a lot of the other alternative therapies, the evidence is really not there that they work. They're often very expensive. And again, you know, there are safety issues with some of these medications as well. So I think that there are possibilities, but on the whole, you really, if you can, hormone replacement therapy is the way to go. And we, particularly now that we have got preparations that really are very similar to a woman's natural hormones that she would have had if her ovaries were continuing to work as usual. I don't know if Beverley wants to add.
Yeah, Beverley, did you want to add? No. Helena, did you have any thoughts on that one?
Just to highlight that it's clearly an important priority for women, and we and many others have been involved in multiple studies to try and find out the evidence on whether these initiatives work. For example, we've had a large randomised controlled trial on acupuncture. As Amanda mentioned, we've run a very large trial on dietary replacement of phytoestrogens and then supplement replacement, and also many studies on hormone replacement therapy and other alternatives. So it's important to note that there is quite a lot of research in this space. Unfortunately, for most of the preparations, the effectiveness is just not what we would like them to be. And as Amanda said, the side effect profiles are still of concern. So it's not in any way that that doctors and academics are not willing to work in this area, because it is really important for women, but more that we just haven't found the right preparation as yet that's really going to make a big difference. But talk to your health professionals, and the only other thing to say is that it doesn't have to be one or the other. For some women, and Kirsty's given you a really good history of what worked for her in terms of hormone replacement therapy. For some women, a combination of hormone replacement and alternative agents, and for some, just alternative or complementary agents. But just keep in mind that there is a lack of regulation and quality often also in alternative products or complementary products. And just because something is advised as natural doesn't mean that it won't have side effects. In fact, if it works, it almost certainly will have some side effects and risks. So to make sure you're really well informed.
I'm not a medical expert and I'm not going to dish out any, and I'm really grateful for the professional feedback. I just wanted to say, Natalie, that you're not alone. We're in this together. Thank you for sharing your story. I tried every single anything under the sun. Please make the hot flushes go away, I screamed. The thing that worked for me in the end was I actually gave it all up and I started indulging in a fortnightly massage. So instead of spending all that money on other stuff, I realized that I just needed to bring my stress down, my anxiety down, needed to feel strong and good in my body. So I ended up indulging. If you got the budget, it's a perfect excuse to get regular massages. And the other thing was that I started to really listen to my body in a way that, so instead of trying to focus on a silver bullet solution, I actually started to really focus on, right, when do I feel hottest? And I worked out for me, it was drinking alcohol and when I was really stressed. And so I actually focused on those two things. So that could be, it's not going to give you the respite that you probably want, but I have noticed that really doing some deep listening. I even, dare I say it, kept a diary for a while like a total nerd and started to work out, like, were there some things that were really affecting how I felt in my body around my menopause? So that might be something. It's not going to be everything, but that might be something.
Kirsty, that's a really important point, actually, because there is good evidence, and Amanda might want to allude to this, that, for example, cognitive behavioural therapy, which you've talked about, your psychologist, can be helpful. Avoidance of the precipitants are really, is really important. You were obviously very in tune to that. So those things about reducing your stress and making sure you're looking after yourself mentally and physically, very important. And there's evidence that they do work and they should work. So really, it's not something that the evidence around that is quite good.
And part of that, I think, is, sorry, Rhonda, we've got one question and we're going, I think you're right, Helena. I think part of that is actually finding joy. So, there's so much pressure when you get a diagnosis, so much serious weight on you to have to now look after yourself even better than before. So like finding joy in exercise, finding lightness, not feeling like, oh my God, I've got to get rid of all my stress, just trying to find some nice outlets for that. So important. Over to you, Rhonda.
All right, thank you. No, thank you. Great answers. Could I direct this one to Beverley? Beverley, could I ask you this question? In women on MHT for early menopause, is it preferable to be on a cyclical MHT for best health outcomes?
I don't think it actually really matters as long as estrogen is taken. And I think that's probably the key point, because it's the estrogen component that will help with the symptoms. And the progesterone will prevent there being any overgrowth in the lining of the uterus. My patients, I give them the choice as to what they might like to do. Some women want to have bleeds on a monthly basis, and they will be on, one that they will get a regular withdrawal bleed. I have to explain that it's not their ovaries working, it's the way that the hormones are being given. And some women don't want to have a bleed, in which case they'll take continuous medication with the progesterone being continuously. So I think it's a choice that I give women, and they will pick whichever one they want to do.
Great, thanks, Beverley. Can I just throw this one to you too? This was just thrown up by Kate. Do you think HRT will ever get on the PBS, particularly estrogel? Yeah, and yeah, okay. Do you think it'll ever be on the PBS?
Well, I'd like to think it will, but I think it'll only ever be on the PBS if women stand up and say that, the fact that you have to pay so much for hormones is not good enough, really, when there are a lot of hormones that are given to men that are on the PBS. So I think the only way that this will change is by power, really, people power. I hate to use that phrase, but that's the only way it's going to change. And on International Women's Day, that might be a good thing to do.
Yeah, enough is enough.
Why aren't hormones that women take on the PBS?
Yep. Okay. So when this ends, I want you all to get out marching on the street. We will we'll fight that battle too. So moving on to another question. We probably only have time for one more. Amanda, could I ask you this one? Elements of the app useful, transferable to older women going through the menopause transition?
So this app was designed for women with early menopause because there was no other resource for women, and certainly, and you know, as Kirsty has beautifully described, there are really elements that are just individual to women who are experiencing early menopause versus women who are experiencing menopause at the usual age, which is around about 51 years. There is information within the app. You know, we talk about hormone therapy and we talk about non-hormonal therapy. So there's certainly some of the information is relevant to women, older women who are going through usual menopause. But and part of that is because, you know, compared to women with early menopause, there's much less research. A lot of the research we've had to extrapolate from older women to the younger women. There are a number of quite good websites, you know, for women with usual age menopause. The Australasian Menopause Society, Jean Hale's Foundation have got good websites. There are 2 apps that have been developed, both one in conjunction with the North American Menopause Society, one in conjunction with the British Menopause Society, and that's called MenoPro or Balance, that respectively. And so they might be something that women might want to have a look at. There's no specific Australian app for women with usual age menopause.
Okay, thanks, Amanda. And while I've got you there, can I throw this one at you? What is the risk to daughters if mothers have POI?
So as Beverley, so Beverley in her case studies really described the risk for daughters in a family with the Fragile X premutation. But even when you don't have a specific gene identified, there can be an increased risk of early menopause in daughters whose mothers had early menopause, and it really increases, the risk increases the more affected family members you have. So if you've got an aunt who's got early menopause as well as your mother, and so if you've just got one affected relative, it's about 6 to 8 times you've got an increased risk of early menopause. If there's more affected female relatives, then that risk can go up to 12 times the risk compared to the general sort of population. Okay,
thank you. And Christian has made a plea to us to please promote this to oncologists. Her oncologist is not great at directing her towards credible information. So a plea from Christian that if we could do a really great job at promoting this app to oncologists. So Christian, we'll certainly try. We will certainly try and do that. So we do have time perhaps for one more question. The question here is around HRT safety. Are HRT patches safe? Does anyone want to jump in there with that one? Maybe Beverley, do you have some thoughts on the safety of the patches?
Yes, I think in fact non-oral forms of HRT are the safest because and effective as well, because if you have an oral form, then it goes through your goes through your gut, goes to your liver, and you may not have as much hormone into your circulation, and it can affect your lipids in your liver, affect coagulation factors, so factors that make you more likely to have a clot. Whereas if you have a non-oral form, then it goes through your circulation first, and that makes it a bit more effective, especially if you have issues with digestion. And also it doesn't affect the coagulation factors in the liver. So for example, someone who's had a clot in the past may be suitable to have a non-oral form of hormone therapy.
Great. Okay, so it's in fact safer. And Natalie seems to be using this to her advantage. She says hot flushes are worse when she's washing dishes, so now her husband has to wash all the dishes. So there's maybe some advantage. And so we're going to we're winding up to the last minute. So I just want to throw again to Kirsty, and perhaps just Kirsty, just get a sense of where you are in your journey. We know you're 10 years in. Maybe just some final words around just where you're at in your journey at the moment.
Yeah, I think I'm at a point as close as I'm ever going to be to acceptance about my diagnosis. And part of that is rethinking the way that I thought my life was going to turn out, as everyone does when they get a significant health diagnosis, especially if it affects plans like having a family. And I've discovered that it's wonderful to be a member of the village helping to raise children, but still be able to sleep in on a Sunday and every so often pre-COVID go on international travel. I've also realised that in the village, we need people almost who do have premature menopause, who can drop everything and be there for people when everyone else has got littlies at home. So that's been a great learning. I've been grateful so I believe that once you can work through some of the trauma of a diagnosis like this, it actually can become very empowering. So I've been able to, through my experience, be able to be a support for other women with infertility. I actually have friends now who are in their late 40s starting their menopause journey. And thankfully it's still fresh in my mind. So when they start talking about it, I get it. I'm grateful, and this is not always the case, that actually this journey has brought my partner and I closer together rather than torn us apart. So I feel like we're a pretty strong team. And also I've talked about women's stuff in a way that I never thought I would, which I'm really grateful for as well. So I just want to say that wherever everyone's at the moment in their journey around their diagnosis or waiting for a diagnosis, time does help. And isn't that just so frustrating that it's time that you have to wait for and you can't just fast forward to where you probably want to be? But I'm really grateful for everyone who's here, who's educating themselves, who's worked on this app to help everyone feel empowered, to connect people. And I think this is the good work. So I'm really grateful for everyone for coming, and don't let your diagnosis weigh you down. Breathe through it if you can. Try not to get too scared by everything that the medical professionals might tell you. At the end of the day, look after yourself, find joy, find happiness in where you can. And if that means not doing the dishes, I say lean in, because sometimes it's freaking hard going through this journey, and you know what? Take your wins while you can. So yes, Natalie, power to you. Also, I just wanted to comment as well that I've taken this app and everything else I've been part of, and I've actually given it to my medical professionals, because I actually think it's really powerful coming from a patient and not just from a medical organisation or a board or a committee. So, anyone who's in the room who's like, yes, where's this information? Please give it to the people who are looking after me. I'd say empower yourself, you give it to them and say, look, this has been really hard and there's been no information, and this is good. Please put this on your file.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you. So it's really helpful information. So we've got less than a minute, so I'm going to wind up now. I'd sincerely like to thank all of the experts that were here today. Amanda Vincent for her extraordinary commitment to equity of information, access for women, for Beverley Vollenhoven, who is a leading, a leader in this field and extremely renowned world leader in this field, and Professor Helena Teede, who is an international expert and incredibly well thought of in this field. So thank you all. Kirsty, it's been a tremendous pleasure. Thank you so much. We really, really benefited from your presence here today. So thank you to everybody. Thank you to everybody that came online. Let's spread the word. Please go and tweet. Please go on Facebook. Please go and join, sign up to the app, sign up to the discussion forums. Obviously, we couldn't answer all your questions today, so place them on the discussion forum and we will get to them. So thank you all very much.